Welcome, and thank you for joining me with this presentation. A few caveats to kick off. This is a presentation that I have given in the past. It's gone for original. It was a research ed. I've given it a couple of research eds, and they're 45, 50-minute slots. So what I'm going to try and do is fit this into our 30-minute timing. So that'll mean we're sort of rushing through a little bit. I apologise in advance for that. There's also a bit of storytelling in there because my journey to what my classrooms look like now are a result of the journey I've been on. So as I'm going through a little bit of my history, it does sound it's a little self-indulgent. However, it's believe me, it's important for the story that I'm telling. It's also I'm impressed that you're here, given that what we've just been in, and I think Tim's continuing in that room. So you've withdrawn yourself from that room. I'm not sure I would have, because that was great, wasn't it? And actually, a lot of what he said I touch on, because he's talking about culture and the power of it. And so I'm certainly going to be looking for that 20% of compliant but disengaged in our audience this morning. So beware. But thank you for joining this presentation. It's applicable to all subjects, all years, and all ability levels. What you will hear in this presentation is the result of 20-odd years of teaching. I'm not a researcher. I'm just a teacher who, in the process of really wanting to teach well, has done a lot of reading and thinking on the topic. It is a presentation that offers a mix of anecdotes and evidence, hopefully in something approaching the right balance. As a profession, we're about 50 years behind medicine, for instance, when it comes to our practicing acknowledgement of evidence-informed practice. We are still very much a tradition-based field. I teach as I was taught, for instance, but there are signs of a shift towards an evidence base, and groups such as Research Ed, which you can see stamped on my slides here, are leading the way. This presentation is a summary of my experience and thinking to this point in my teaching journey, and what I have found to work in the establishment and maintenance of that enigmatic superpower we refer to as culture. I first gave this presentation in Sydney last October, just a few weeks after this photo was taken. Yes, I wanted to encapsulate what it was that culture means, but I wanted more to rub the Sydney-siders' noses in the still fresh grand final result. Now, I know I'm not in an AFL city. However, you guys are in the finals and we're not, if you are following. It was also an excuse to introduce them to my family, 3/4 of whom appear in this photo celebrating the final siren. So how did I justify plastering this slide on the big screen at Queenwood School in beautiful Balmoral? By asking how else do you explain over 100,000 people paying $300 plus for a ticket, $300+ for a ticket to watch 40 adults run around after a ball. It's the Melbourne footy culture, of course, and we don't even question it. But if we do question it, the conversation inevitably turns to culture and the awesome power of it. Merriam-Webster's 2014 word of the year was culture, so awarded as the word that attracted the most inquiries to their online dictionary site. Merriam-Webster offers 6 definitions. Among them, culture as enlightenment and an excellence of taste acquired by intellectual and aesthetic training. Culture as the act or process of cultivating living material, such as bacteria or viruses. And the meaning that attracted the dictionary hits, the focus of this talk, culture is a set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterise an institution or organisation. Merriam-Webster note in a neat way that the term conveys a kind of academic attention to systematic behaviour. Why was it the word of greatest interest in 2014? And why do we continue to discuss it? Perhaps because it has become an unsettling word. Culture used to be a good thing. Now it's not. The idea of culture as unconscious groupthink is ascendant. Now when we attach the word culture to something, it is often to suggest that it has a pervasive, pernicious influence. Cancel culture, corporate culture, drinking culture, And heaven help those organisations that get characterised as having a lazy culture or a drug culture, or perhaps even a toxic culture. But perhaps you enjoy a coffee culture in your neighbourhood, or work for an employer who trumpets a culture of transparency or an open door culture, and no doubt a culture of accountability. And what is our default culture? Lord of the Flies often gets a mention here, but for classrooms, it is most often persistent, low-level disruption. In the words of Tom Bennett, kryptonite to any lesson. In a 2018 report undertaken by the reputable UK think tank group Policy Exchange, low-level disruption was found to be the cause of greatest drain on teacher morale. But whether positive or negative, teachers in all walks of life are in no doubt as to the hold that culture has on individual and team behaviour and motivation, and that success relies largely on their ability to shape it positively. And for us as teachers, that means getting to grips with low-level disruption. Now, in the study that I mentioned a moment ago, the Policy Exchange study, they found that 80% of teachers report low-level disruption in their lessons on a daily basis. We've just heard Tim refer to this exact thing. 62% of teachers were considering leaving the profession because of it, and 72% knew of a colleague who had left teaching because of low-level disruption. Pupils are losing time that they can ill afford to lose due to low-level disruption, another point that Tim touched on. An estimated 1 academic year in lesson time during their primary years and the better part of a year in their senior schooling, time that they can ill afford to lose. 4 of the recommendations out of the report were: 1, low-level disruption needs to be taken more seriously at all levels. Number 2, schools should have a clear policy on smartphone use, and it's good to see a lot of jurisdictions now have those in place. 3, initial teacher training must include a more thorough grounding in behaviour management techniques. I wish I'd had just an hour with Tim rather than the years of nonsense, really, and useless advice that I got in my teacher training, and I can see some nods around the room in agreement. And 4, annual professional learning focus on classroom management techniques and policy. So some really great things coming out of that UK study. Up on the screen, we have a chart from the Centre for Education Statistics and Evaluation showing how frequently teachers wait a long time for students to quieten down at the start of lessons. New South Wales is in pink, Australia is the striped teal. And so you can see here we're looking at frequently and always combining to about 65 or 70%, which does match the data that Tim was talking about also. That's a significant, frequently or always waiting to get lessons started. So it's a big deal. A news item from the end of 2022, 1 in 9 teachers walking out in the first 5 years of service, up 50% on 2021 numbers. Low-level disruption is considered a key factor in this morale draining statistic. One solution that has some evidentiary support is a UK training course in classroom management, which is named the Incredible Years Teacher Training course. Now, this is just an example of what teacher training, the sorts of things that Tim was just talking to us about, the effect it can have. And through that 7:30 report, we saw a school that's been able to turn things around very quickly. So this is just another study in the UK that found similarly beneficial results. So reduced disruptive behaviour, reduction in inattention overactivity, improved relationships, almost a focus on order and removing low-level disruption improves relationships rather than a focus on relationships, which when I came through my teacher education in early years, that's all I was told that mattered. I don't think that was helpful advice. I think there's better advice out there now. Sustained improvement and so on. So with low-level disruption being such a threat to academic growth and to teacher morale and teacher retention, and it being seemingly the default culture and culture, and I think that we'd probably all agree on that. That's where classrooms will land if we don't do something about it. We have no choice but to be purposeful designers of our own classroom culture. Essentially, in the words of Peps McRae, we choose the social norms or the norms choose us. Also, in the words of Peps, to secure motivation for learning, we must both acknowledge and leverage the influence of group behaviour on individual action. The good news is that we as teachers can use the authority handed to us by our schools and our communities to do just this, to build a culture in our classrooms that ensures students feel safe and supported. But this is not easy. So there we are. It's easier, as Tim mentioned, if the whole school culture is healthy and respects the teacher's authority. But a healthy classroom culture can still be built inside your classroom if this is not the case, and I know that from personal experience. PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment analysis, really interestingly shows that the greatest variations in scores are not from school to school, but from classroom to classroom, indicating that how we gear our classrooms differently to the one next door, that does have an effect on our students and their performance and their development and their growth. A strong classroom culture flicks a switch in every student as they cross the threshold into your room. Threshold is one of the words I use. It's part of my language. Students know what I mean by it, and if they don't respect the threshold, all I've got to do is mention threshold and they know exactly what I mean. The question is, does this switch direct the student towards antisocial and disruptive behaviours? That would be strong but unhealthy. Or towards prosocial scholarly behaviours? And that would be strong and healthy. Everything we do, particularly in the early stages of our school year, but they're establishable at any point in the academic year, which, as we're midway through term 3, is important for us to know. We don't need to wait around until January or February to make changes. These must be about setting up a classroom culture characterised by the latter, a strong, healthy culture. So having a strong culture, my point here is it's not a strong culture, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. A strong culture will exist in most environments, but the default is not going to be positive. And we need to acknowledge that, and that's just how dynamics and our working with young people work. So our job is to create a strong, healthy culture. And so from this point on in the presentation, when I refer to a culture of excellence, that's what I'll be talking about, a strong, healthy culture. Remember, there's no such thing as neutral. We can't just expect things to fall into place. Now, the power of culture from Pep's excellent book on motivation. I think this is I love this quote. I think that encapsulates. And like McRae, Dan Pink takes an evolutionary view of motivation in his book Drive, which is the inspiration for the whole school approach of Dixon School in the UK, which is a famously cohesive, strong and healthy culture. In it, Pink outlines the 3 drivers to human motivation. Our biological driver, which serves our primal needs and urges. The extrinsic driver, the carrot and stick, the cash is king motive. And a third, more nuanced and subtle, yet more powerful driver that is activated by a desire to be good at things, to be successful. Again, something Tim talked about this morning, that need of ours to feel that we can master something, that we can be successful. And actually, it is at the heart of my greatest teaching discovery of the last decade, actually, and that is that success leads to motivation rather than the other way around, which I thought for 15 years, and I was trying to motivate my students in order to engineer some success. I've very much flipped that around. Also, natural curiosity, this is the third driver. Interesting ideas spark the third driver, a desire to make a contribution to the world and to serve a greater purpose. For high performance, what matters most is the third driver. Pink argues that appealing to the third driver is the basis for establishing a culture of excellence. A quick tour of my cultural journey. As soon as I started teaching, I was introduced to the world of coaching and from sports coaching, and quite quickly had the school first 11 cricket job thrust upon me. I was lucky enough to inherit a strong side in that first year and took them to an undefeated premiership. Anyone could have coached that side to a premiership. They were considerably stronger than any other side, but we still meet up for annual reunions. We'll catch up for the 25th time next March in Sydney. Why do we still meet? Because of the team culture that side generated. It bound the group together for life. It was powerful. Fast forward to Bedford School in the UK, I was given an opportunity to run their cricket program, which I took with both hands. A 450-year-old school with a strong cricketing pedigree, counting among other illustrious alumni, ex-England captain Alistair Cook. Now, the culture of this club in its first 11 was strong, but noticeably, almost proudly, unhealthy. Elitism and laziness were evident, as were demeaning traditions and uneven recognition of club members. But I had seen positive, healthy cultures. I knew of their performance and, more importantly, their well-being benefits, and I set about rectifying the situation. Firstly, by restoring a strong work ethic, healthy respect, and expressive even support as baseline values. As part of our identification with these values, we had to dispense with some unhealthy traditions. This was not always popular, but it was necessary. But I also restored some traditions, like some healthy ones. Among them were the reinstatement of the first 11 cap and blazer. We brought Cook back to present those. This softened the blow and reinforced the message that we were trying to send. In sporting parlance, this is known as a culture of excellence. And as the grid on the right suggests, this can happen when we point our cultural design energies at the intersection of the person and the performance. So in this little quadrant up here. It took a couple of seasons, but we built a culture of excellence in the cricket program at Bedford School. Yes, we had some good players, but so did other schools. What gave us the edge, and I wouldn't have been able to articulate it at the time, was the superpower of a high-performance culture. Around the same time, I took on a boarding house, which was also suffering a little from neglect. I felt that we could have the same impact in the house as the cricket club, despite it having a less obvious performance focus. But I was learning that building culture wasn't about performance. It was about consistency, about care, about always showing up for your troops. But other than a determination to run high-functioning, happy and successful environments, there was no recipe for what I was doing. And in the classroom, where there was not a team identity to appeal to, there was less success. Whilst my students were doing okay, it was on the strength of tightly managed, harmonious classroom rather than any pedagogical prowess on my part. And so upon moving back to Australia from the UK and discovering quite by accident the wonderful community of educators on the platform formerly known as Twitter, my focus shifted to the classroom. I soon discovered that the classroom environment would require a more intentional approach to culture building. My research helped me understand why I'd been able to run successful boarding and sporting programs, but importantly now, what I needed to do to be successful in my classroom teaching. So what have I learned about culture and where am I now? Culture, in essence, refers to how things are done around here. It is all-powerful. Harnessing it is our teaching superpower. And attending to culture is upstream thinking. It cuts problems off at the pass. We must focus our energies on designing a culture that will deliver success in the classroom. And so what does success in the classroom look like? Students motivated to learn and fueled by past success and appropriate challenge. The 80% rule. The 80% rule is something I'll touch on later. Rosenshine popularised this, does have some research basis to it. But the success, as I said a moment ago, that leads to motivation and not the other way around. I love this quote from Dylan William. Students possessing, we're still talking about what success in a classroom looks like, students possessing a very clear understanding of classroom expectations and standards. Standards expected are sky high. Students possessing a very clear idea of and reassured by intelligible, consistent, predictable routines. On this last point, running routines makes the process of learning easy, so the focus can be purely on the challenge of the content. Simple routines take up to 20 runs, about 3 to 4 weeks to become automatic. Benefits for students include increased feelings of safety, well-being and confidence. For us teachers, they free up the behaviour burden and allow our teaching to be more responsive. And so how do we achieve this? We nudge norms in the direction we want them to go. We appeal to the third motivational driver. And like Dory, we are relentless. So where do we start? I started with a commitment to explicit teaching and to teaching well, because relationships are formed on the back of good teaching, not the other way around. Success is reliant on it, and it's our core task. Then I went to work on building a culture of excellence. As with the success motivation dynamic, I realised I had been focused on the establishment of good relationships with my students as a precursor to success in my subject. This was the wrong way around. I committed to a change in focus. I now commit wholeheartedly to teaching well, respecting my students' time by making every minute count. As a result of creating a thoughtful, safe, planned and productive environment, I begin to earn the respect of my students. Success, the 80% rule, fuels motivation, which reinforces that cycle. But you can't be what you can't see. I needed some inspiration. I visited Michaela in November 2019. Who's heard of this school? A few of us. It was a career-changing couple of hours I spent there. They have a very powerful, charismatic head teacher who's in the news, sometimes not for the right reasons, very outspoken, and she's driven, she bought this is the school, it's like just an office block beside the railway in a poverty-stricken area of London. The playground is underneath, it's a car park, and the students in the area are desperate to go there, or at least their parents are, because they have simply instituted the sorts of things that I'm talking about here, but on a school-wide level. Michaela is an extraordinary school. It's a fascinating case study into what a culture of excellence and explicit teaching can achieve. It would be fair to say that I did not know what was possible inside the classroom until I spent 2 spellbinding hours at this incredible London school. These are some of my observations. Not a minute was wasted. There was zero lateness. Politeness, courtesy and respect were embedded in every interaction. Not a word was spoken by a student in class unless they were invited to speak. Sounds a little oppressive, but the kids were so happy and they felt empowered to speak evenly, all of them. It was controlled. In one class, a student turned around when I entered from the room from the rear. So as a visitor, I was allowed to roam free for an hour and just duck into classrooms, and they welcome visitors. A student turned around, I entered from the back of the class. They got a demerit. I felt terrible. But that was the sort of thing. They just turned around to see who was there, and they instantly, and that sounds also oppressive and mean, but there were 10 to 1 merits given to demerits. It was a very positive and encouraging environment. There was an extraordinary focus and purpose in every lesson. The corridors were silent. This is a busy school. You see what... It needs to be silent, because if they don't insist on silence in a school like this, I work in a school like this one, there's plenty of open space. You don't need silence between lessons. Here they do, because it would just be deafening. So they were silent. The lessons were inspiring. Every lesson was prepared down to the last minute, taught by brilliant teachers who all used visualisers and mini whiteboards. It was consistent. The lessons were lively and fizzing with intellectual activity. When a teacher asked a question, every hand went up. There was not the merest hint of exclusion or bullying. I left in a daze. I found a cafe across the road and spent an hour and a half writing about what I'd just seen. And the results this school are achieving are almost beyond belief. In October, they're the top performing school in the UK. In October 2022, when I say top, they have this Progress 8 measure. They measure a baseline measure when students enter the school, say in our equivalent to Year 7, and then they measure their progress when they leave school. They returned a progress score of plus 2.27. 0 is the national average, so it's zeroed as the average, a bit like a Z score if there are any mathematicians in the room. So these were the best results in the country, this school, which in itself is extraordinary. But when you place it in the COVID context, that has served, as Tim mentioned, to widen that achievement gap to the detriment of disadvantaged schools, of which Michaela is definitely one. It is a truly staggering result, and we need to sit up and take notice. So I've identified 5 key ingredients to the creation of a culture of excellence. Teach behaviour explicitly. That sounds familiar. Control technology in the classroom. Run routines assiduously. Have high expectations and engineer success. Engineer success. And it doesn't matter who you're teaching, we can allow them to experience success. And experiencing that 80% sweet spot, research says is enough success to keep me coming back, but there's a little bit of challenge in there as well. So the first key ingredient, I'm just looking at the time, we've got a couple of minutes till break. So I'm going to flip through these because that there are the ingredients. What I do now in the presentation is I go through each one in a little detail, provide a little evidence. So I will flick through quite quickly each of these five areas. Tom Bennett has written this manual. Sam Strickland's written another, the behaviour manual. These are excellent books. We have these in our school. Teachers read them. But I spent the first 20 years of my teaching not being brave enough to mention behaviour, and no one did. We were just expected to manage our classes, and we expected kids to behave. When you change that and you tell kids how to behave, like Tim said, and I teach in a privileged school. Most of them have been brought up okay, but they still need to be taught how to behave, and they take it well. They like being told how to behave. They want to know what the rules are of engagement. So I can recommend this highly. So teaching behaviour explicitly. There's some evidence behind. Here we've got PISA reading performance in controlled environments. They're the pink, in the less controlled environments in the striped teal. So you can see the results on well-managed classrooms, on behaviour management, engagement. Controlled tech use, we're all on board with that, I know. Consistently applied routines. I'll just run through my routines for your interest. So this is the third key ingredient. So if possible, I'm in class before my students or I'm arriving with them. It's easy to get caught up in corridor chat on the way to class. I try and avoid this. I set my classroom up in the same way every lesson. There was a picture of it on the opening slide. For me, it's mini whiteboards on desks, paired desks in rows facing the front. Students' arrival in my classroom should herald the following messages: that they belong, that I am pleased to see them, and that I am well prepared for what is to follow. I want to see a shift in their demeanour as they cross the threshold into my room, a shift that reflects their respect for what goes on in here. Conversations don't continue, jokes do not get told, pranks have no place or put downs. I want them to know that they are entering a proud and productive learning space, and they better not mess with that. Students will be on the lookout for the starter activity, a do now. There always is one, and they know where to find it. So this is a strong start. Then follows an I do, we do, you do process. This is Anita Archer's model of explicit teaching. That's the language I'm using there, with a clear emphasis on clear modelling, followed by checking thoroughly for understanding, etc. A common language around routines is important for me, particularly the go-to strategies. So this is the language I use. Threshold, every minute counts. Students are very familiar with this. The do now is the starter. Voice off is what I use. I don't use silent voice, I just say voice off. And that's pretty clear. Cold calling, I have all hands up and cold calling, so students can be, they know that they can be called on at any time. There's no opt-out either with a cold call, so I don't know, doesn't bounce me to another student. Hover it, 3, 2, 1, this is my mini whiteboard language. It's got a language all of its own. SLANT I use as an acronym for when I want them to be sitting up straight, to be listening, to be asking questions, nothing in their hands, and tracking the teacher. That's the SLANT acronym. Silent teacher. Yep, silent teacher. So when I'm modelling, I'm silent, they're silent, nothing in hands. So their pure focus is on what's being unravelled, I suppose, in my subject, step by step. through a problem. I like choral response. I think a choral response has its place outside of the primary classroom. So if I get all hands up and it's just I'm checking for listening or it's something simple, I just say on 3, 1, 2, 3, and everyone throws the answer back at me. It just has that, that 20% of students that Tim was talking about that are not messing up, but they're just not engaged. So these are all, this is me fighting that. Turn and talk is turn and talk to your partner, 5 to 15 seconds only. So this is my language. I also talk to them about the forgetting curve and golden silence when we're just in independent practice. So routines are the glue that hold our lessons and our structure together. And finishing well and on your terms is important. And the evidence backs up that routines provide structure and they're important to students' success and students' feeling of confidence and well-being. There's some techniques to keep them honest. You'll see here least invasive intervention. That's that pause technique that Tim was talking about, and using proximity. So there's some other ideas there. Pastor's perch I'd love to talk to you a little bit about, but we don't have time. And high expectations, obviously. Obtaining a high success rate, that's our 80%, and that was our 5th ingredient. Cognitive load theory is essential for us to understand so that we're not overloading our students so they can experience success. The single most important thing, no less, for teachers to know. And cognitive load theory, Greg Ashman is going to be talking about in his keynote this afternoon, so that will be looking forward to that. Flicking through to, I don't know if you're across the 56 schools in the Archdiocese of Canberra and Goulburn that have committed. This is Australia's Michaela, and their results are incredible. So that's an Australian case study. So my summary, we engineer success, we have high sky expectations, we run routines, etc. Great behaviour. I've noticed students are, overall they're more satisfied, they're buying in. I can tell they're buying in because they're setting the room up, they're using the language. I think they're buying in because they're experiencing success. They like the routines, they feel safe, supported, they can see I'm putting in, and because actually they don't have much choice. Once we set the culture up, that's the superpower. They just fall into line. I spotted this tweet from Adam Boxer, who I can recommend his blog and X's, tweets, whatever they're called now, as I was putting the final pieces of this presentation together. I don't wish to be naive, I don't wish to be arrogant, I don't think either serves the interests of my students. I hope I've hit the experience research sweet spot in this presentation today and that you've got something from it. Thanks for listening.